Well, there will likely soon be a new legally protected class in New York. Along with race, gender, religion, age, employers are now going to be banned from discriminating against people who are overweight, fat. It's part of a larger movement across the country, which proponents have dubbed size freedom legislation. But to me, this raises a question of whether weight is something so innate that we can't control it, the same way we can't choose our race or our age. And I want to be sensitive to people who may identify as fat, but to say that this is a civil rights issue, as the bill's supporters want to frame it, is that going a little too far? Well, the legislation was just approved by the New York City Council, and it bans height and weight-based discrimination in employment, housing, and public accommodations. Mayor Eric Adams is expected to sign the bill into law later this month. It does include exceptions for employers who need to consider height or weight as part of the worker's ability to do their job. The bill is being championed by fat activists who say that prejudice against fat people is a real thing.
In most places in the United States, you can get fired for being fat and have no protection at all, which is crazy because this is a very fat country.
And we're going to hear from that activist in just a moment, but this isn't just New York. D.C., San Francisco, Madison, Wisconsin, a handful of other cities and towns have done this already. And in fact, Michigan is the only state with a workplace discrimination law that covers a person's weight. It's actually been on the books for nearly 50 years. But again, my question about this is a little bit more nuanced, because while I certainly think that discrimination against anyone based on who they are or what they look like is wrong, it's categorically wrong. But I also think that there's a clear difference between things that we can control, skin color, disability, age, which fall under well-established legal protected classes, and whether weight is something that a lot of people can control. And if so, shouldn't that make a difference here? You can't change your skin tone, but people change their weight all the time. I'm not saying that they should or they shouldn't, simply that in many cases they do. And I think that that's what makes this bill and the debate around it really interesting. So joining me to discuss is the woman you just saw, Victoria Abrams. She's a self-proclaimed fat activist at the forefront of New York's bill banning weight discrimination. Victoria, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
You really think that this is the same category as race or age or disability, religion?
Well, we see that there are rates of discrimination that occur similarly to people of that are overweight, as well as to people who with different races. Basically, we see that there are similar rates of discrimination. So if people of a different weight are being discriminated against, should they not have that same protection?
Well, here's the thing, right? Mm-hmm. The only difference is, and look, there are people who have hormones, there are people who have genetics, there are things that they can't change.
Yeah.
But many times with something like weight, it's a lifestyle, or you can make a choice. And if the people, look, when you have race or race or age or disability, these are things out of your control. And the law has to protect people from being treated unfairly when they have no control over their life.
Have you ever been fat?
That's the thing. What's that?
Have you ever been fat?
I have not.
So how would you know what it's like to be a fat person and whether or not that's something you can change? As a fat person, as a person in community with fat people, I can tell you that weight is something that people have tried desperately to change. And the point of this bill is not whether or not people should or should not change their weight. It's there are fat people that exist in the United States right now. Should these people not have the same access and same protection to work if their weight has nothing to do with their job and it is not impeding them on their job? Why should their weight even be a factor? Because currently in the United States, people who are overweight or obese, people who are fat, are 37% more likely to experience discrimination than their thin counterparts.
What happens if I read you the exceptions, right?
Okay.
I think we have a full screen of it too. What happens if employers say it's necessary for this employee to be a certain weight? Do you have a problem with those exceptions, or maybe employers expanding it?
This bill specifically is targeting those where your weight does not impact you. If you're working at a desk job, my weight does not impact my ability to do my job literally at all. But people have this perception of overweight people and assume that because we're fat, we're lazy, we're unable to. They have a lot of negative stereotypes.
Right, and we have about 30 seconds. I want to ask you real quick, the idea that this could open up a flood of lawsuits. Everybody's going to say that they were discriminated against because of their weight. And what is fat?
There's a lot of ways to determine it, but you can look at the BMI, you can look at other things. But if you don't want if you don't want lawsuits, don't discriminate. Simple.
I'm glad we had this discussion. I'm glad you came on. I think it was really interesting. I wish we had a little bit more time.
Sorry, yeah.
But Victoria Abrams, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for watching. Go to NewsNationNow.com to find NewsNation on your cable provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.